Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in November. As usual, I am going to be doing this book battle style where I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other. And there's not too many to talk about, so hopefully it won't take too long. I'm also not sure if any of these books were actually good. So that's a shame. Anyway, I do also firstly want to talk about a book that I DNF'd, so 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This is meant to be some kind of love story but set in 1984. Maybe, and kind of contrasting it to George Orwell's 1984. But for the most part, it's just so slow that even though I listened to 1/3 of the audiobook, which was still, I think, like 15 hours because it's a 40-something hour audiobook. But in that first 15 hours, which is just as long as some audiobooks are, hardly anything happened. I mean, sure, there was a murder, but that was right at the beginning. And there was starting to be an introduction to this cult, which I think was going to play a bigger part. But just, I could not bring myself to care. We have one character who's this woman who's mostly just going to bars and sleeping with men. You can't say much else about her without spoilers, but like, it was pretty pointless. And then the other character is this writer who has somehow been sucked into rewriting this teenage girl's story. And he is also very boring, also kind of creepy to this young girl when he meets her. And it seemed like the story that this young girl had written was actually true, and it's all about these little people and like, I don't know. It was strange, and I kept waiting for that story to mean something, and I'm sure it would have eventually, but I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't do it. Everything that was happening was so boring. It was going into so many details about things that I didn't care about. Previous Haruki Murakami books have been strange in a really interesting way, and it's had a lot of interesting ideas introduced, and this one was just none of that. And I read some reviews where a lot of people said that actually with other Haruki Murakami stuff, they hadn't felt connected with the characters, but with this one they did. I actually felt the opposite. I had no connection to these characters, so I decided not to bother with any more of it. And I think I'm actually done with Haruki Murakami. There have been some parts of his books that I've liked, but it's not worth digging through all the stuff that I don't like. I really need to get better at DNFing things. Okay, so let's get into the battles. Firstly, I've got a science fiction and a thriller. So we've got Upgrade by Blake Crouch up against You by Caroline Kepnes. So Upgrade is actually a book that I was really excited about this year. Blake Crouch also wrote Dark Matter and Recursion, which are both very twisty time stories that I really loved. But Upgrade is about a man whose mother was involved in genetic experiments that went wrong, and as a result, genetic modification has become highly restricted, pretty much illegal. And this guy works for the company that goes around investigating people and arresting them. And they've got a lot of power because of how wrong this woman's experiment went. But then something happens and this man ends up getting genetically modified. And it's all about kind of him gaining all these abilities as a result. But to be honest, the main character was so boring, and none of the science around the genetic modification was either very interesting or even believable. I especially got hung up on this idea that suddenly he had a perfect memory and he could remember everything that had ever happened in his life perfectly, and I just don't believe that any genetic modification that could be made to you now would make you remember something perfectly that happened before you had these genetic modifications, because you don't store those memories. Like, memory is not like that. I just couldn't believe it, and so much of the story was based on this idea that he had a perfect memory that just the whole story was ruined for me. But also, like, Dark Matter and Recursion had some really cool twists at the end, but the ending of Upgrade was just boring. It was an action scene that didn't mean anything. I think the actual twist at the end was the idea that compassion is more important than intelligence in terms of fixing our world, but honestly, is that a twist? I don't know. I just was so disappointed by this one. And then we've got You by Caroline Kepnes. So this is following a man named Joe who becomes very obsessed with this girl. I guess I'm not obsessed with her because I've forgotten her name. Nope, don't remember. I think because throughout the book, a lot of the time Joe refers to her as you. So we're listening to his internal monologue and mostly he's thinking his thoughts directed at this girl. Beck, that was her name. Not a normal name, that's why I forgot it. So he's going around stalking her very quickly. He gets into some very dodgy behavior. And to be honest, even from the first page or two, he gets into this big rant about Kindle, and he's being very rude to a customer at the bookshop that he works at, and I just disliked him right from the beginning. But I was quite engaged in following along with his inner monologue and seeing how he was justifying these awful things he was doing, and just like how off his perception was, because even though you're getting his story, you can tell that that's not actually what's happening. So I didn't mind the first half of it, and it felt like it was building. There was going to be some kind of twist at the end, that maybe he was going to get what he deserved, or something was going to happen at the end. But then the second half of the story, kind of, it just felt like random bad things were happening, and it didn't really feel cohesive anymore. And just overall, the end of the book was very unsatisfying to me. It was kind of like the most predictable thing that you could think would happen in a thriller with a stalker. And I kind of just want someone to rewrite the whole end of that book, to be honest. So, if I'm putting Upgrade up against you, do you know, I think these decisions are always the hardest when it's two books that I didn't enjoy. Because which one did I not enjoy as much? No, I know. I was super mad about Upgrade, partly because I had such high expectations, but also it was just so boring. At least with you, even though I was disappointed in the ending, at least I was engaged for the first half of the story. So, I'm going to put you through to the next round. Then for our next battle, we have a couple of fantasies. So I've got The Atlas Paradox by Olivie Blake up against Ghost Story by Jim Butcher. So The Atlas Paradox is the second book in a series that, I don't know, is it a trilogy? I don't know what the series is called. It follows these 6 students who are accepted into this program at the Library of Alexandria, where they get given access to all this magical knowledge. They are supposedly the best of the best in terms of magical ability. But in the first book, the idea was that even though 6 were admitted, only 5 would get to go on to the next year, and one of them would have to die. Things didn't go quite as expected, and our characters are trying to deal with the fallout. I would say this book series is very much about the characters and their emotions. There's very little about the actual magic that they're studying. It's talked about in a very vague and conceptual way, and I really wish that could be a little bit more concrete or a little bit more connected to the plot, although it potentially was in the second book a little bit more connected. I think sometimes with this book series, like, it describes things in a very epic way and it sets things up to seem like they're going to be very epic, and you don't always get the payoff, or at least for me. But I think that's because I'm a more plot-based reader rather than a character-based reader, and this is a more character-based series. Still, I always feel like I want to say I don't like the series, but I did really enjoy my reading experience. After reading some other very unenjoyable books, this was a breath of fresh air. I think it's just a fairly solid fantasy, but it is kind of targeted at that new adult age range, which isn't meant as a criticism, it's just that that's not the age range that I'm a part of, unfortunately. I'd love to go back to being in my 20s. So I don't know, these are a lot of fun, maybe lacking a little bit of substance, but I think it was an okay time. Then we've got Ghost Story, which I think is the 13th book in the Dresden Files. I remember the number fairly well, I hope, because this is where I've decided to end my journey with Harry Dresden. So the Dresden Files is about Harry Dresden. He's a wizard and also a paranormal investigator. He gets involved in this war between the vampires and the Wizard Council, and he also has the Fae always trying to manipulate him. And there's a whole bunch of other supernatural stuff going on. In Ghost Story, there's ghosts, and I don't think I can say anything else about the plot without spoiling the previous books. Basically, the previous book was called Changes. There were a lot of changes, and Ghost Story is dealing with the fallout of that. But also, in a lot of ways, Ghost Story was a filler book, and then the next book I can tell different things are going to be happening again. And in some ways, I did feel like the setup at the very end for that next stuff does make it seem like the next stuff might be somewhat interesting. However, for the majority of this book, I was bored out of my mind. None of it felt like it mattered to me. I didn't care. It just felt like a bit of mucking around. I don't like the relationship between Harry and the young girl that he mentors. I don't like Harry as a person. And I might be tempted to continue, except that my library doesn't have the audiobooks for the rest of the series, so I'm out. I can't be bothered trying to track down the audiobooks in another way. And there's no way I could get through these books reading the physical book. So I don't know. I've talked a lot about not liking the Dresden Files. Basically, Harry is just a guy who always feels like he needs to protect women and doesn't really treat them like their own people. And he's just yuck. The books do try to make up for it, but anyway, I'm done. So if we put this up against the Atlas Paradox, I'm definitely going to choose the Atlas Paradox. I have a lot more fun with that. There's a lot more interesting characters. And even the magic, which is very vaguely described in the Atlas Paradox, I think is better than the quite boring magic that's used in the Dresden Files, in my opinion. So, the Atlas Paradox is the one we're going to put through to the next round. Then our last battle for the month is going to be between two graphic novels that I read. The first one is Saga Volume 10, and we're putting that up against Jessi's Secret Language. So Saga Volume 10 is the latest installment in the Saga series. It's been a while since Volume 9 came out, so I know a lot of people are anticipating this. I think I'd forgotten that I hadn't really enjoyed the end of the series, and so I picked up Volume 10 and it kind of just reminded me like, oh yeah, I don't think the story is going anywhere. So primarily we're following these two people of different races. One is from the main planet and one is from the moon, that are at war with each other, but they fall in love and have a child, and most of the story is told from the child's perspective. And there have been parts of this graphic novel series that I've really enjoyed, but overall I just think it tries a little bit too hard. But at the same time, like, lots of people love it, but just I don't think it's really for me. I don't find myself caring about any of the characters, and I used to think that the story was going to build towards something. Like, there's a lot of foreshadowing, but I think I've decided after Volume 10, when nothing really happened, that there is no bigger vision for what's going to happen. So that's probably fine if you like the characters, but since I don't, I think I'm out on that one as well. Then we have Jessi's Secret Language. I don't know which book this is in the Babysitters Club adaptations that have been coming out. I know it's book number 16 in the original Babysitters Club books, but they've been doing them slightly out of order in the adaptations and like sometimes combining them. But Jessi's Secret Language is about Jessi, who's one of the younger babysitters in the club. Do you know what the Babysitters Club is about? It's about this club of babysitters. It's self-explanatory. So Jessi's the youngest one. She is also a ballerina. And in this book, she also takes on a babysitting client who is deaf. So this young boy and his sister, the young boy is deaf. And she ends up putting on this ballet show and making it accessible for these deaf kids and learning sign language. Just a really great book for teaching young children a little bit about the experience of deaf people and how you can be kinder to them and make things more accessible. A little bit about the experience of being a family member of a deaf person. Like, these books are middle grade, so it's fairly simple, but I remember reading this as a kid. Honestly, I learned half my life lessons from the Babysitters Club books, and these are just super nostalgic reads for me, so I had a great time, and I think these modern adaptations are probably pretty good if you wanted your children to read them. But I don't have kids, so who knows. Anyway, so that is all the books that I read in November. Not many, only 7, which maybe is a lot for some people, but 2 of them were graphics. 3 of them I read via audiobook. So really I only read 2 books. And that's really not a lot for me. But I know why I didn't read many books in November. And that reason no longer exists, so hooray for me. More reading on the horizon. But let's put these 3 books up against each other to decide the best book of the month. Firstly, we've got You by Caroline Kepnes up against The Atlas Paradox by Olivie Blake and Jessi's Secret Language by, I don't actually know who wrote this adaptation. They keep changing the authors. I mean, Anna Martin wrote the initial Babysitters Club books, but it looks like the latest adapter of these books is Chau. Okay, so what have we got here? I think firstly we can cut off You. If it had continued like the first half of the book, and maybe if there'd been some twists, I would have really loved it, but there weren't, so very disappointed in the ending. So then we've got The Atlas Paradox and Jessi's Secret Language. I mean, Jessi's Secret Language is a middle grade book, and if it wasn't for the nostalgia of the Babysitters Club, I don't know how I would feel about it. So I think actually we're going to pick The Atlas Paradox by Olivie Blake. There are some things that I wish those books would do that would make it a lot better, but still, there are characters that I really like. And there are moments that I really enjoy. There's actually even an element of time travel in this book series, and you know I really love time travel, so I'm hoping the book series will get better and better. I know the first book was released independently, and so I'm expecting Olivie Blake's writing to get better and better as well. Fingers crossed. So that was my reading in November. Do let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, because I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.